Coming up next on Twitch this week in computer hardware, 50-core teraflop processing. It's not Sandy Bridge Extreme. X79 motherboards are shiny. The Aquarium PC's been updated. Notebook gaming, cable modem firmware, and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 146, recorded November 17th, 2011. Mineral oil and extreme motherboards.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. And by Ford, featuring Sync with My Ford Touch. Sync with My Ford Touch gets you to your destination with integrated turn-by-turn directions and directional arrows displayed on screen. Check it out in the new 2012 Ford Focus and at ford.com/technology.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by, well, the man who is at home this week, Mr. Brian Shrout of PCPer.com. How's it going, man?
I'm doing pretty well. I was almost not home this week. I was in New York City for Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, but came back just in time to do This Week in Computer Hardware with you, Patrick. I wouldn't miss it, except for Thanksgiving. I won't miss next week. But other than that,
we'll be getting our turkey on. We'll be getting our baked goods on. I would like to dispel any rumors that I may have started earlier today in the chat room involving Ryan Shrout's gaming desk, his heavily customized gaming desk, including a catheter system for extended gaming sessions. That is a rumor. It was an attempt at humor, and there is no actual truth to the catheterization option on Ryan Shrout's personal gaming desk. So,
but if you're interested in it, if you send me an email for about $900, I can set you up with the kit necessary to do this said fictional thing. So
I also would like to suggest the Baja catheter rather than a traditional medical catheter because one goes on the outside and doesn't hurt, and the other one is the inverse. Just saying. Intel Sandy Bridge.
Yes, let's talk about hardware. Yes.
Let's talk about safe things, not 12-hour marathon gaming sessions. Yeah, actually, I guess they did an entire episode of South Park on that, which I don't want to get into either. New Sandy Bridge, we talked about it coming. We teased it. We were excited about it. Are we talking about 6-core CPUs here? Or are we talking about the motherboard? Or is it just a whole mixture of giant awesomeness?
So it's a whole new platform, right? So it is a new chipset, new processor socket, new processor. But at the heart of the CPU, at the heart of the processor, the architecture is very familiar. It's a Sandy Bridge E, which the E either stands for extreme or enthusiast or whatever your favorite term is at the time. But it differs from current Sandy Bridge in a couple of key ways. First, it has more cores. Sandy Bridge today is either a quad-core hyper-threaded, quad-core non-hyper-threaded, and they have dual-core hyper-threaded versions. The new Sandy Bridge E is released 2 SKUs. Both of them are 6-core hyper-threaded, so 6 physical CPU cores capable of running 12 threads. What's interesting here is if you look at the die shot here, if you're watching the video version, you'll see that there are 2 very conspicuous locations there below the 6 cores that show things that kind of look like cores, right? You think, maybe something should go here. And the truth is the die is built as an 8-core part. Those are not being released in the consumer version of the processor. There will be in the Xeon versions for servers and maybe some workstations and that type of stuff. A little disappointing that they didn't choose to go to offer both a 6-core. I mean, the reasons they do that are twofold. We had some in our comments of our review. Why wouldn't they do that? By removing those 2 cores from being used, Intel could possibly, that would be the threshold that would let them run under the 130 watt TDP at the frequencies that they wanted to reach. One of the things they have to be very conscious of when they release a product like this is they don't want these oddball results. So say they released the 8-core part as the 3990X or something like that. But it can only clock as high as 3.6 gigahertz instead of 3.9 gigahertz that the current part, that part that was actually released, can do. What you'd see then is single-threaded performance would be worse on this brand new Sandy Bridge E part than on the Core i7 2600K that we have seen since last January, basically. So what Intel doesn't want to do is kind of create this thing that we saw with AMD's release of the FX8150, the bulldozer parts, where the previous generation architecture was actually outpacing the new processor in some instances. And Intel just kind of maybe didn't want to deal with that, so they made sure that the Core i7 3960X and the Core i7 3930K were as good as or better than the currently existing Sandy Bridge parts, which is good. That's what you want, right?
Yeah.
The other key difference is they took out the graphics. There's no integrated graphics. There's no processor graphics included on Sandy Bridge E parts. Not necessarily a big deal. You know, you're talking about $1,000 or a $550 processor. Chances are you're not buying one of those to run an integrated graphics system. The only kind of drawback to that is you don't get QuickSync, which is the software that, or it was a fixed function hardware that could be taken advantage of by software that could do like video transcoding and that kind of stuff. And so
I hear you, but at this point, it's like once you've thrown six cores at your rendering problem, I think you're probably not thinking a whole lot about quick sync acceleration. You know what I mean? It's just like I think it goes hands in hands with dropping integrated graphics, where we're like, this is a power part, this is a big honking massive collection of cores to hurl at your problem. I actually think integrated graphics would be nice because there's just a whole category of people who do serious work that don't particularly need 3D graphics that might take advantage of it. But again, you made the point. Once you've dropped $1,000 on your CPU, and you're probably going to put like 32 gigabytes of RAM on top of this machine, you know, $50, 75, $300 for a graphics card is probably not going to be that painful by comparison.
I would agree. So there were, in case people were wondering or maybe would complain about it, you know, I agree. QuickSync might be a little bit faster, but by the time you've got 12 threads running on any kind of video transcoding job you want, it's going to be fast enough. The other kind of big changes are quad channel memory controller. We've talked about this for a little bit as well. Motherboards will either ship with 4 DIMM slots or 8 DIMM slots, which, you know, quad channel memory controller doesn't do a whole lot for real world performance. We saw pretty big benefits in like Sandra and other kind of synthetic memory based tests. You do have higher potential bandwidth, but the truth of the matter is, in reality, the applications don't get a big advantage from 3 channels versus 2 channels or 4 channels or whatever it is. So what the benefit you do kind of get, which is kind of like a side benefit, is now to get full performance out of your system, you have to buy 4 DIMM modules or 4 DDR3 modules, which means you're probably going to see almost every system start with 16 gigs of memory, right? So 4 gigabyte modules, which, you know, you can get 2 gigabyte modules, but they're not significantly less expensive. So if we assume everybody buys 4 gig modules, you're gonna have 16 gigs of system memory, which is kind of insane, right?
I don't know. I'm kind of into it. I mean, I was laughing. I was typing into the chat room before, like, "Oh, my Core i7 seems so old," because it's 2.5, almost 3 years old. It's like, you know, 2 motherboard evolutions behind now. But I'm still running 12 gigabytes of RAM on that because I wanted to take advantage of Windows 7's ability to cache application information for faster launch in main system memory, and to be able to deal with some really huge file sizes with video. But at this point, you know, I think this is such a forward-looking processor. This isn't really a gaming processor. It's a I have hard work to do processor, and I think that crowd naturally is going to be loading painfully large amounts of RAM on their system. And it's kind of funny. It makes me want to go to Newegg and be like, how much is 32 gigabytes of RAM? Like, how much are 8 gigabyte sticks running at this point?
Well, if you get a motherboard with 8 DIMM slots, you can just buy 8 4 gig modules and get 32 gigs that way. When you start talking about 32 gigs of system memory, I mean that's kind of insane. You know, one of the ideas
it's $160.
Yeah, I mean that's insanely cheap, right? So some of the ideas people have been throwing, what do you do with all this system memory? Even if you allocate 12 gigs to the operating system, maybe you have 20 gigs left over, you create like a RAM disk or something like that, or something where if you're doing these high-end things like video editing or photo editing, you get to access some of this stuff. It's really, it just, we don't really, I don't want to say we don't have the perfect use case for it yet, but it's nice to have the flexibility. It's nice to have room to grow, so to speak. And the other major change is the final big change to the processor is that we move from 16 lanes of PCI Express, which is what current Sandy Bridge processors have, up to 40 lanes. So now you're talking about being able to have a by 16, 2x8s, and 2x4 PCI Express connections directly coming off the processor, and they are capable of PCI Express 3.0 speeds. So if you're a multi-GPU person and you want to make sure your graphics cards have the most available bandwidth, you'll be able to do 3-way SLI or Crossfire with 2 full by 16 and a by 8 connection, which is just going to be great for, and if you want to do quad, which we've seen a couple of motherboards in house that will do that, 1 by 16 and 3 by 8s. So you're not, bringing cards down to by 4 connections or anything like that. You're getting tons of speed on these motherboards and processor combinations. It really is. We're finally seeing a replacement for that Core i7 920 system that you have, Patrick, with the X58 chipset, which some people kind of complained already. Why do we need a $1,000 processor anymore? And that's a completely valid argument. If you look at these results and you don't see a need for a $1,000 processor or a $550 processor anymore in your life, you don't have to buy it. But for me, 6-core Sandy Bridge, 12 threads, video editing, like that's
video rendering.
Yeah. We're gonna put that in an editing machine. It's like 8 DIMM modules where you can get 32 gigs of memory without having to use registered or memory or anything like that. I mean, that's kind of like the big advantages to these systems. Processors overclock pretty well. Got it up to 4.7 gigahertz with all 6 cores running at full load, right? So that's 1.1 gigahertz over what it would normally run at with all 6 cores operating.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I guess I should also point out, we talked about this before too, this does not ship with a cooler. So you pay $999 or more for a processor. You do not get a cooler with it. You have to pay, $70, $80. Intel's now selling their own branded Asetek self-contained water cooler.
Have they split? Wait, let me ask a quick question here, because last I saw a few weeks ago, Intel was still shipping with their retail boxed CPUs. They were still shipping coolers with the majority of those, or just not shipping one with this particular part.
Right. Sandy Bridge E does not ship with coolers. This regular Sandy Bridge parts will ship with kind of that default standard Intel cooler that we all know and loathe. Maybe the right term for that. But and it's funny, there's actually on one of the pages, I think on that same page where we show the picture of the water cooler, there's a picture of a separate boxed kind of basic cooler. Yeah, there it is. It actually looks neater than the other ones because it's kind of got this nickel finish to it and then a clear fan on it. It's going to be about $20. And what's interesting there is if you look at that slide, it says it's compatible with Sandy Bridge E and future Ivy Bridge E LGA 2011 sockets. So tells you what you can expect in the future as well. So when Ivy Bridge comes out, there will be an extreme or enthusiast version of that too. So, overall, I was impressed with the platform. Right, it's a little bit disappointing. They released 2 SKUs: the $1,000 3960X and the $550 3930K. The only difference between those parts is 100 megahertz or so, depending on how many cores are running. But you're talking about almost half the price. And what we usually do is we are able to emulate the performance of the lower end processor with the higher end processor, just so people can get a performance metric of what that SKU will be. We weren't able to do that with this because there is a hard-coded bottom frequency that we couldn't adjust. So any of the benchmarks that we would have made wouldn't have been accurate. So we're on 30K. And we're waiting for that to come in so we can actually do performance tests with it, because I think that's going to be the much more popular model, obviously, than the $1,000 part for people who are actually going to buy this.
It's funny. This got me looking through Newegg at sort of super high-end memory configurations, and I was laughing because if you take, I'll drop the link into the show notes so we can pull it up on the screen. But if you look at the sort of the most high-end memory offering they have, it's a G.Skill Ripjaw Z Series 64 gigabyte. It's 8 gigabyte sticks, a DDR3 SD-RAM, 1600 hertz, $1,300 is sold out. So you step down to something a little more reasonable, right? And it's 32 gigabyte kits, so it's 4 8 gigabyte sticks, and those are averaging about $450 to $450, $500. Patriot and G.Skill, pretty much the only one. I think Corsair's got a kit for $700, running at 1866 instead of 1600, and then you drop down to something profoundly reasonable by comparison. 16 gigabyte packs, 2 8 gigabytes, and you're looking at about $115, $125 a stick for 8 gigabytes of RAM, and those are running $230 to $250. So it's kind of funny. You could actually end up spending, you could quickly end up spending, $1,200, $1,500 in RAM to really load out one of those machines if you want to get completely out of control with the memory configurations. So you can actually spend a lot of money on memory. You just have to buy something in the neighborhood of 32 to 64 gigabytes to do it. But yeah, I was looking at those. It's like, oh, 64 gigabytes of memory, 6 cores, all the video processing, no waiting. It's interesting to see how it's pretty consistently. Even, like about $125 a stick.
Yeah, even like my, our web servers that we built fairly recently, we're like, we need to have as much memory as the largest database size we think we'll have. That way, we never have to read the disk. And it's like 64 gigs never came up in the conversation with what we were going to do with that. And now it's like, oh, we get 64 gigs on my desktop. I guess, okay.
Oh, 3 years ago, I was like, 12 gigabytes of RAM. I have all the RAM. And now I'm looking at this like, oh, 32 gigs, man? It's like $400. Awesome. Now, of course, in my particular RAM configuration, which I don't want to get into, but we should probably move right on to the X79 motherboard. You guys have a preview up of a roundup that's coming on PC Perspective. You did video. I got to say, the new round of X79 motherboards, the Intel one actually really stood out for me. But you guys are going to be looking at the Asus Rampage 4 Extreme, the Sabertooth X79, the Asus P9 X79 Pro, MSI's X79A, Gigabyte's X79 UD3, Intel's DX79 SI. You are excited about X79 platform, or is it just at this point that it's been so long since you've had sort of a new a new platform of motherboards, through a new chipset platform to get all jiggy with?
I think that's a lot of it,
with motherboards.
Right? Yeah. Sure, I mean, we can pretend it's 2001. That's fine. It's one of those. It has been a while because Z68 was very similar to P67, which wasn't really a big upgrade either to anything. So this is the first time, and this is also the first time the motherboard manufacturers have been able to. Now they've got enough PCI Express lanes where they can create unique designs. They can add different accessories. They have extra PCIe lanes that they can put in a higher end network card. You'll see dual gigabit Intel based Ethernet ports as opposed to third party brands like Realtek and those guys. You've got this. The only kind of downside of the motherboard is if you look at the LGA 2011 socket is huge, and those DIMM slots are like, you can't
flanking it.
you can't. The thing is, you can't adjust it. You can't. Those are fixed. You had a little bit of wiggle room before, so basically half of your motherboard is defined by the processor and memory configuration, and then it's only underneath that they have any kind of flexibility.
And I'm assuming these are all like $300 motherboards because they're all very pretty. They all have customized heat sinks. They're all anodized. They're playing around a lot with the textures in terms of the graphics on the base of the motherboard. I don't know. I mean, is that partially because there is a limited ability to differentiate because of the kind of mandatory motherboard, the mandatory memory CPU layout, or is it just because the Intel board with the skull on it? I was like, wow, Intel put a skull on a motherboard. You know what I mean? Because you always think like, Intel, it's green, it's simple, it's just never going to die, and we're and then it's. I think it's going to be fun. But are any of these going to be available for under $300?
Yes,
they
that
scream
Intel board
expensive
is supposed to
me.
retail for $280. So that'll be under $300. But the I think especially the Gigabyte X79 UD3 there, that's Gigabyte's lowest end X79 platform, and it should sell for about $200, maybe a little bit less than that, 189 or something. But if you look at like the Asus Rampage 4 Extreme is the top end board from Asus. That's going to sell for $460 or something like that, and they actually have a Battlefield 3 branded SKU of that will be like $20 more, that comes with a copy of Battlefield 3 as well, which is a nice pack-in if you're going to buy that board anyway. You don't have that game. But there will be a gamut of boards available, and I think the lowest price you'll see is probably the 160, 170 range as things kind of settle down here in the coming weeks. It's going to be a long time. I don't even know if we'll ever see X79 boards below $150. It just doesn't seem likely to me because of the cost of all the other components and the target of these audiences. These aren't budget machines. They're not meant to be budget machines. They're for enthusiasts. They're for workstations. They're for users that are prosumers, power users, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, we have 7 X79 motherboards in house now, and actually I was just talking with Ken. I was like, what am I going to do with all of these motherboards? Like, I have no idea how to go about breaking them down and doing all these individual articles and stuff. They like to send us their best ones first a lot of times. That's why a lot of them will seem like they're really high-end and expensive. Rampage 4 Extreme being a high one, and the Sabertooth X79 being a specific one. They're MSIs. But Gigabyte kind of was in a rush. They sent the UD3, which would be, I think, more indicative of what people are looking for in terms of actually spending money on, $200 for your motherboard type of thing. So, but there's going to be USB 3 aplenty, even though the chipset doesn't integrate it. Everybody's adding on USB 3.0 ports. Bluetooth is very popular. But Asus is adding a Marvell controller that supports SSD caching, which I guess I didn't even mention that. The X79 chipset does not support SSD caching either, which is a feature of the Z68 chipset. So that's a little bit of a disappointment in that
regard. I wonder if
regards.
just didn't seem there was any point to it at this point, given the amount of RAM they expect to be on the motherboard and the amount of cache on the chips. I mean, it seems like, what is it, like 400 gigabytes of cache on the chip now? Exaggerate slightly. I like what
let's talk about something. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was enjoying what Titus dropped in the chat room. Ryan, Patrick, is there going to be a way to solder an Intel Knights Corner 50-core, 22-nanometer coprocessor to my motherboard for some way awesome gamer rig? And it's kind of, because I was thinking about this story earlier this week, and hence my starting the show notes, and it was like, wow, supercomputers aren't dead. They're at a gathering in Seattle, and Intel is not normally somebody you think of. Not that Intel could make a supercomputer, but you always think of like classic names. Cray comes to mind. And they dropped a coprocessor, a chip just for offloading calculations from the main CPU, running at a teraflop, 50-core, 1 trillion calculations per second. Basically, so if you're modeling weather or nuclear blasts or doing molecular modeling or trying to show what happens when you run 17 cars into each other over a cliff with realistic modeling, and it's kind of funny because it's Intel versus NVIDIA and AMD. This is kind of like, this is just I can't imagine what the power consumption on this thing is.
It's kind of large, isn't it? So you remember Larrabee, right? This is all a kind of, what can we do with this project that we spent a lot of money and time on and make it kind of viable? And this is, we saw at IDF, what were they called? Knights something, and they were added in cards. Remember we showed the system, the server that had like 8 of these dual slot cards in it that had these kind of, I think they were 36 cores at a time or something on each GPU, and they were doing real-time ray tracing and that kind of stuff. This is kind of like the continuation of this. 50, so you're getting 50 Intel x86 individual processors on a single piece of silicon. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, somebody, Scott just told me Knight's Ferry was the original system from September, way back in September. So it's, I mean, this is really impressive stuff to see. No, you're not gonna be able to solder it on anything, and chances are, in terms of a, you don't want this turned out not to be a graphics solution for a reason, right? They realized that the software side of things was a lot more difficult than they thought it was going to be. So good for the server market. I think that's where it should be in terms of its most viable location for being accepted and used correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of programming to make this work. Not going to work for Battlefield 3, and that's one of the big, obviously, outside of the cost, one of the big things for supercomputing environments is whether or not they want to recode everything to take advantage of the performance possibilities of this chipset. Should we take a moment to thank our sponsors, or should we?
No, let's do that. We'll take a quick break here before we get to a couple more news stories and jump into everybody's emailed questions to let everybody know that this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix, the company we are all very familiar with, is that their shtick is streaming thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which saves you time, money, and hassle. No longer going to a rental store, no longer going to your grocery store to drop off a DVD in some kind of vending machine type item. The best part about Netflix is there's lots of ways to access it. You can use a gaming console like an Xbox 360 or a PS3, Nintendo Wii. You can access it on your Mac or your PC, of course, your iPad, your iPhone, your Android phone. Lots of Android phones are supported now. If you don't have a 360 hooked up to your TV and you don't have a PC hooked up to your TV, then you can also use something like an Apple TV or a Roku box. Some DVD players have support for Netflix. There's all kinds of devices that have support for Netflix and the streaming technology. So you'll always be able to find a way to get access to it. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly using any of those devices, and you can begin watching a movie or show on one device and then finish it on a different one, no matter where you're at. So if you travel, if you start watching a show in the evening, you fall asleep, you can come home the next day, it will instantly resume at the spot where you stopped the playback before, which is really nice. You can cancel the service at any time. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I really think once you give this service a try, you get 30 days free to try it out on all your different devices, all your different locations, see what kind of collection of videos they have. Netflix.com/twit is the URL to use to get that free 30-day trial. Please use that URL when you sign up. It supports us, it supports you. We keep bringing you this content. Netflix.com/twit. And we thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware and hope you enjoy streaming instantly with Netflix.
Woohoo! NVIDIA reports Q3 2012 results. How they doing, man? Are they holding up?
They were slightly more profitable than they were previously. Let's see. They said throughout 2010, well, it is a fact. Throughout 2010, NVIDIA struggled with the poor results of the 400 series. They've done much better with the 500 series. They had gross revenues of just over $1 billion for the previous quarter, with net income, profit basically of $178 million bucks. Mm-hmm. Margins pretty good at 52%. And let's see, what else did Josh say here? It's interesting to look at. So NVIDIA had $1.07 billion in revenue. AMD reported $1.7 billion. But keep in mind that AMD has a whole process CPU division that doesn't exist inside NVIDIA. Right. So that gives you an idea of the value of the Quadro brand, the value of the GeForce brand. And there's a little bit in here about Tegra, to be sure. Let's see, Tegra had $170 million of that revenue. Kind of tells me that it's still slow. It's still kind of picking up. Think about how long ago the original Zune device came out, right? And that was the first NVIDIA Tegra product. But it's not really until there still hasn't been that product that everything has been based on. You think of the mobile world, the tablet world, those types of things, and there's still, everybody is using a lot of everything. You still see a lot of Qualcomm, and Tegra's kind of sneaking in there a little bit as well. Q4, they're saying will not show much growth for the company just because of all the other things going on in the industry, like the flooding in Thailand and how that affects not just hard drive manufacturing, but all kinds of manufacturing and PC development, those types of things. So they did well, maybe not as great as they had expected. Actually, it says they did outperform the street's expectations by a little bit. So, all the rumors of Sandy Bridge and Llano killing NVIDIA because the discrete market was going to just die away has not happened yet. I don't say it's not going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it didn't quite work out that way.
No.
You are working on an awesome project, a project that I will probably never do again. The legendary Puget Systems Aquarium computer, which is now in version 4.0, and having built the Puget Systems system, it's it's an interesting experience because essentially it's an aquarium. Whoop, can you not hear me?
I said, why are you laughing at me?
I'm laughing because I'm waiting for you to have the experience I had where you have to replace a part inside of it and you reach into 5 or 6 glorious gallons of mineral oil and you get that spectacular sensation. It's interesting. When we did it, it was really bare bones kits. You basically got an aquarium with a lid and a steel panel that kind of dropped and fit onto the top of the aquarium to mount your components to bolt your motherboard and everything too. Now they're actually doing a pretty sophisticated kit where you are getting, and I think this is really critical, you're getting a cooler on the back of it that allows
you get a radiator essentially.
Yeah, basically you get a radiator on the kit. I bring that up because what we realized is we were doing the thermal testings on the original kit, which was much, much simpler, is you actually ended up with a huge amount of heat that was pretty much captured because the oil didn't really circulate. So you'd end up with a lot of heat. There was some thermal movement in there, but unless you put a pump in it, you ended up with a lot of heat captured directly around the GPU and the CPU. So what they've done now is by including the pump and the radiator in their kit, they've allowed you to keep the oil cooler, which means you will keep your entire system much cooler, which is really critical because I still think heat we lost the power supply inside of our original one, and I think heat was one of the major issues on that. Either that or the oil actually penetrated into somewhere it wasn't supposed to be.
That's what I'm
terrible things to it. Yeah.
I'm on the second floor of an office complex that is carpeted, and last thing I want to deal with is that. So I think what we're going to do is get one of those like a wash machine tub that you have to put down underneath your washer dryer type combos now and build it on that just so we have a nice base should a leak occur, let's say that way.
I wouldn't worry about a leak. The case, the aquarium case is going to be really, really solid. What you really want to worry about is somebody knocking it off of the table or the desk. And you don't have to worry about an earthquake so much.
No.
But and I'll tell you what, when the thing's done, it is heavy. 5 gallons of mineral, as you will know when you get back from the farm and feed store.
Yeah.
Farm Depot is pretty awesome. Tractor Supply Hardware, I love those stores. When you're carrying your gallon buckets, you'll realize that mineral oil is incredibly heavy. How do you like it so far? You've obviously built it. We saw the video, right?
No. We have not built ours yet. We're just kind of basing this all off on systems that they had built, and I think the video that we were showing was one of the demo videos. I'm still kind of collecting. I'm kind of collecting my thoughts. It's one of those things. They were very particular. It's like, hey, when you build this system, make sure you know exactly what component, kind of what you're saying. Make sure all the components work for sure, and that these are the exact components that you want to lose forever. Because once you dip a product in oil, you do not unoil it ever, and it will be forever part of that system, either working or not. So I'm going to figure out what kind of lights we want to put in it. If we want to put any, I think I'm going to get one of those fish aquarium submarine divers. That kind of pops up and down, things like that. We want to make sure I get all that planned out before I start dumping oil in a plastic container.
There's a really cool link off of the Puget System web page for the Aquarium PC where it shows the actual evolution of the kits. And I see I was looking at this May 2007, the original system launch, which is what we had, the Lian Li motherboard tray and the very super simple aquarium. And then as you scroll through this, July 2007, the biggest issue was basically it takes 12 hours for the heat to stabilize. And of course, the temperature was stabilizing at 88 degrees Celsius, which was a little high. And they started experimenting with the pumps and stuff. So it's I don't know. I think it's fun. Obviously, Ryan thinks it's fun. You may think we're insane, but it's an interesting read. And I'll tell you what, mineral oil, a lot less expensive than floor inert, which is something that is easy to get off of a motherboard, but costs, I wonder if it's down below $400 a gallon yet.
I think that's the same stuff we saw at, there was a machine at QuakeCon that a guy had built using that. It had a really cool effect of it boiled the liquid right by the processor and stuff. So you got these little bubbles that would come off and everything, which made it look very cool. But yeah, I'm not paying $400 a gallon for anything.
No. We got lucky at Tekzilla. They actually, not Tekzilla, excuse me, at the Screensavers, they actually donated a few gallons of it to our project. And the stuff was incredible because it's like clear, colorless, odorless, pre-fluorinated fluids. And they use them for cooling like supercomputers and military equipment. And it is the coolest stuff in the planet because it is just chemically inert and it conducts heat really well. And it was really fun to play with, but it was one of those moments where you're like, wow, I just put 2,000 gallons worth of liquid into a bucket, not a bucket, but essentially 2,000 gallons worth of liquid, into a 5 gallon into like a 25-gallon wash tub, which is like what we had to work with. But it's pretty fascinating stuff. I'm
looking forward to it. I think we're going to make a big deal out of it, a multi-week project, kind of figure out, maybe build, get some donations from these hardware guys and make it not only impressive to look at, but just really, really fast as well. So we'll see. Maybe a Sandy Bridge E-based mineral oil PC.
Getting slightly and only slightly more practical. Tim's got a question about notebook options for gaming and, well, programming. Tim says a friend of mine's son is looking for a laptop, quote, to game with and mess around with programming, unquote. He specifically mentioned Alienware. I know the feeling, but I'm not certain whether one of these would actually be better than a customize your own laptop from a company like Power Notebooks, CyberPower PC, or Exotic PC, as Alienware's a Dell subsidiary these days, and Dell is notorious for, quote, cheaping out, unquote, on components to improve their margins, as are most major Windows PC manufacturers, adds Tim. I get the feeling money is not that big an object for them, not if they're seriously discussing Alienware, it isn't, but build quality, power, and something that will last them the 4 years of college is. Normally, I'd consider a MacBook Pro in boot camp, but this family has a severe Apple allergy. Any suggestions, any answers, anything I should be asking but didn't? Well, the truth is just because the son's mentioning Alienware doesn't mean the family particularly wants to spend Alienware money on a notebook, number one. And number two, and I hate gaming notebooks. I'm going to say it. I love the Alienware hardware. I love gaming notebooks when I'm borrowing somebody else's, but as an investment for college, a gaming notebook is a giant bag of suck, because invariably if you buy a notebook that'll play Battlefield 3 today, which is going to cost a fair amount of coin, it's just not going to hold up in 2 years, and you're probably not going to be upgrading the GPU, and you're not going to be upgrading the CPU, and the battery life is, although battery life has gotten a lot better, especially with the Alienware 11X is amazing, but it's also an 11-inch screen in terms of battery life. But gaming notebooks are better, but they're still not a great investment. Matter of fact, you can probably buy a nice $500 notebook for programming and spend a bunch of money on a gaming PC and end up with a gaming PC you can upgrade throughout college or use for the really heavy lifting and spend a lot less money and get a lot more functionality. I just, the whole gaming notebook, You don't
believe in a gaming notebook, huh?
Yeah, if you got the money, hey, go for it. If you don't mind upgrading your notebook every 2 years because you need to play the latest round of games, go for it.
Yeah,
but yeah,
the M17X, the M17X is the one I have the most experience with recently. It starts at $14.99, and if you want the top end graphics cards that exist today, you're going to pay $17.99 for it. It is a lot of money. The build quality on it, I thought, was very good. Yeah. It looks like an Alienware machine. You either love it or you hate it, right? But the build quality on it, I thought, was pretty good. I wouldn't worry about it. If you drop it, it's going to crack. But in terms of using it every day, I feel like that wouldn't be an issue. There's a lot of people now, though, that feel like gaming PCs, the gaming notebook is the way to go because they're on the road, or I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. The flexibility of a desktop is still phenomenal compared to what you get with a notebook. It's just a matter of if you maybe I don't know. It's been so long since I've been in college. I feel like it's been so long since I've been in college. People don't have room for desktop computers anymore at school. I guess.
I'm sure you do. That's where they put the robotic keg in the home theater system. Well, how do you feel about? I mean, one of the things that Tim mentioned was power notebooks, cyber power PC, exotic PC. What would be your favorite sort of? I'm not thinking Dell. I'm not thinking HP. I want to buy a gaming notebook. Where are you going? Exotic PC is supposed to have a pretty good rep.
I haven't heard of them. I haven't heard of their stuff, honestly.
Okay.
Honestly, my search would probably start at Alienware just because I think they're going to have a little bit lower cost for the exact same components than some of those guys because they have a little bit of an advantage in terms of being able to play NVIDIA and back and forth for prices and volume and that kind of stuff. And I've had good experiences with them. Most of the other ones, the CyberPower and those guys, they are very much ODM. So what you're going to get at their location is going to be exactly what you get at another location. Very little changes. It's
it's kind of funny because they all tend to offer Asus, MSI, and Sager notebooks that are sold under their flag.
The Asus ones that we've had, the gaming ones, have actually been pretty good too. That's just. I don't know. I haven't personally had a lot kind of side by side in the same time span. I might have had one in 2010 and one in 2011 that I kind of enjoyed playing with.
And they're expensive.
Definitely look at Asus and MSI. Yeah.
I mean, in Asus, like I'm looking at power notebooks, an Asus Core i7 2670QM, NVIDIA Optimus switchable graphics with a GeForce GT 555M. That's $1,300. Next step up. You're looking at the same Core i7 CPU and GTX 560. Jump into a GTX 560M with a 3D screen, which I think is a complete waste of time. That's $1,900. Dialing it back a little bit, you're looking at the GTX 560M, NVIDIA graphics, 17-inch screen, and a 2670 Core i7. That's $1,700 there. So I got to be honest with you, the Alienware, I agree with Ryan. The build quality, everything I've handled from Alienware, and it's only been a couple of machines, but the build quality has been extremely high. And I got to be honest with you, the whole cheaping out on components thing is really tough to do these days. On notebooks especially, because the motherboard designs are mostly controlled by Intel. Everything's kind of co-designed, even if it has somebody else's name on it. They have to be pretty consistent. They're using an Intel chipset. They're using an Intel chip. Memory is a commodity item, and Dell can buy it in huge volumes. So it's really hard to, you can cheap out on screens, but I don't really see, nothing I've seen from Dell indicates they're not spending decent money on the screens in terms of build quality. But yeah, you're looking at, for top of the line mobile components, if you really want a Core i7 and a GTX 560, you're looking at like $1,600, probably $1,500. Not cheap.
All right, let's take another email here from Imani about CPU utilization in games. Says, I love the show. I started with security now and glad I found you guys as well. Thank you. Question, building iFinity gaming rig based around Phenom 2 X6 processor overclocked to 3.4 gigahertz, 16 gigs of RAM, planning on dual ATI or AMD Radeon HD 6950s. 1, how important is it to have both PCI Express 2.0 slots at 16 lanes? Is by 16 by 8 or by 8 by 8 okay, or does the bandwidth actually get saturated? 2, I saw reviews on how a cross-fired 6990 quad GPU setup ends up using essentially only 2 of the GPU cores in Battlefield 3. I read somewhere that while the initial game data on the CPU and RAM to the card is okay, in some cases the graphics data between the 2 cross-fired cards is so heavy that only some of the cores can be effectively utilized. Maybe it's a limitation of the above-mentioned PCIe speeds or internal card architecture, or is it just not true? I am initially going for dual 6950s, but in the future may save pennies for quad GPU. Heck, I'm just hoping to get iFinity to work initially. Yes, always start with smaller goals and expand from there, or start with smaller investments, I guess. So these issues, these two kind of questions are similarly related. How important is it to have both PCI Express slots at 16 lanes? It's not super important. By 8 by 8, I think, is going to be enough for especially dual 6950s. Now, when we start getting into dual 6990s, each of which have 2 GPUs on them, then you might get into some issues where bandwidth limitations are seen or witnessed. The Phenom 2X6, that chipset has, I think, 36 lanes of PCI Express, maybe 32 lanes. So you should be able to find boards that will have 2 by 16, true by 16 PCI Express slots on them. So you should be able to alleviate any of your potential concerns by picking the right motherboard and looking for those that have that particular combination. As for the 6990 kind of issue, quad GPU setup, and only 2 of the GPUs being used in Battlefield 3, it's very possible. It's also possible that that was occurring because it was a brand new game and AMD hadn't had time to optimize the drivers for Battlefield 3. You always get this issue with multi-GPUs that, you know, if you have 1 GPU, you get 100% of that performance. When you add a second GPU, you get maybe 80% of that performance if you're lucky. If you add a third GPU, maybe you get 60% of that one, and a fourth, you know, you're going down into the 40s. So you get the law of diminishing returns in terms of how much money you put in and how much performance you get out of it. So in general, 1 GPU is the best. 2 GPUs is pretty good, but from both AMD and SLI, if you look at their drivers. 3 and 4 have the potential to be okay, but they require more software work. And because not a whole lot of people are doing that, maybe NVIDIA and AMD aren't spending as much time on the driver side of those things. So I would also, if you saw specific reviews that said that, I would bet that AMD and NVIDIA are both going to be looking to optimize drivers for multi-GPUs, especially for Battlefield 3. So but I think with 2 6950s, won't have a problem.
I would hope not. I would hope not at all. We're going to take a quick moment to thank one of our sponsors right now. Well, Ford and Sync.
That's right. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Ford, featuring Sync with My Ford Touch. Sync is the in-car communications, entertainment, and connectivity system that's voice-activated to help you keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road, and I know that I personally appreciate that. One of the great new features with Sync is called Sync Services. Sync Services gives you audible turn-by-turn directions to where you want to go and displays directional arrows on the screen, all without having to purchase an aftermarket or integrated navigation system. So this is I actually think this is a pretty cool feature. Sync Services includes like business search for over 40 million businesses, including telephone numbers, business informations, and directions. It has the ability to do something called Send to Sync, which enables you to use Google Maps or MapQuest on your PC or on your laptop or whatever from your home or office computer to plan a trip. Okay, and then you save that. Yeah, you save your trip online to your online Sync account, essentially, and then that gets sent to you. Have access to that in your car. So when you use voice commands in your vehicle to get those turn-by-turn directions, that's really, really cool. A free Sync Destinations app is available in the App Store, which lets you utilize all this kind of stuff. Gives you mobile access to manage your Sync traffic directions and information systems account on the go. The ability to pre-save destinations to your account, such as home or office. So, you know, the idea here is you have web access to modify maybe favorites, locations that you need to navigate to, as opposed to having to do it with a clunky in-car GPS system, which I think is an awesome idea to do that. It's Ford Tech Navigation. Plus, you get traffic updates sent to your mobile phone via text messages, which is nice. It's all designed to help you keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. Ford Sync with My Ford Touch is available on the 2012 Ford Focus. You can learn more about this and other technologies Ford is bringing to its vehicles at ford.com/technology. Yeah, I think that's really cool. The ability to kind of, if I could, you know, I have GPS in my cars now, but, you know, inputting a destination in a in-car GPS system is just so painful, right? You know, you've got one touch. Like the keyboard on mine is not even a QWERTY format. It's like straight all the way across. So I'm like, I'd never find the number. And so being able to do that on your PC and then have the car be able to take advantage of that through the Sync Destinations app is really awesome. And I would love to see that in all of Ford's cars and all these kind of cars going forward. That's pretty awesome. So Ford.com/technology, and we thank Ford for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Let's go into a few more emails, perhaps, Patrick.
Yeah, I love emails. Mark has a question about cable modem firmware. He says, thank you for your great show. Thank you, Mark. He says, I've had a Motorola cable modem for 8 or so years and a Cisco VoIP analog telephone adapter for around 3 years, and both are working fine. But, to my knowledge, have never had the firmware updated. Does the ISP, Rogers in my case, I smell Canada, or phone company, for me Primus, update these silently? Or is the firmware from when they were manufactured? If they don't get updated, why can they run for so long without any fixes? As customers have access to update them, how do I do it? Well, here's the thing. A cable modem does effectively one thing. It talks to a server at the cable company, and it pushes bits back and forth. It's kind of like the firmware on your Ethernet card, except more complicated in the sense that you've never updated the firmware on your Ethernet card because it just works. And it's kind of funny. Like DOCSIS came out. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to explain DOCSIS, and there really isn't. It's data over cable system interface specification. So essentially a group called Cable Labs, which is, all the cable companies kind of belong to a group, or most of them belong to a group called Cable Labs. They fund it as like an industry group. Cable Labs came up with the DOCSIS spec so that basically you wouldn't have, there's like, when they started this, there were probably 15, 5 or 15 major cable companies and like 1,000 mom and pop cable companies. And the idea was, if we standardize the hardware, then we don't have weird things where we have a lot of fighting between like, Cisco and this router company and that switch manufacturer having competing standards to make things work. So you got like Aris, Big Band Networks, Broadcom, Cisco, Connexit. I'm looking through the Wikipedia entrance. Harmonic, Intel, Motorola, Netgear, Technical, Atarion, Texas Instruments, all contributed to make this cable modem spec functional. First version came out in 1.1. Like 2 years later, they came out with QoS functionality so that the cable company could prioritize traffic, so that VoIP traffic would maybe be a little higher than somebody downloading video. Right. DOCSIS 2.0 doesn't come out until 2001. Pretty much the entire cable industry ignores it. DOCSIS 3.0 starts getting really interesting. And chances are that your cable company is just now starting to upgrade to DOCSIS 3.0 modems, even though DOCSIS 3.0 came out back in 2006, because DOCSIS 3.0 is what's necessary for IPv6 support, which is the future of the internet. Generally speaking, your cable modem is updated when it starts, if it's updated at all. Cable companies have, and I think to a certain degree, probably a very intelligent approach, which is, if it works, we're not going to fix it. If the customer hasn't complained, we're not going to fix it. So you may want to research. I'm not too familiar with Rogers and their offerings, but you may want to research, have they released updated cable modems? Have they moved from DOCSIS 1.0 to 2.0 or 1.0 to 3.0, which has happened in a lot in the US? And, inquire, are you getting the speeds you expect? If not, then I would start raising noise about my cable modem. If a cable modem works most of the time, you can probably ignore it. Although some people have claimed to have gotten speed improvements by upgrading their cable modem. I'm not really buying it. For me, the reason for buying my own personal cable modem was so I didn't have to pay an additional few dollars a month that adds up over time. $60 for a cable modem versus $5 a month or $60 a year to purchase a cable modem from Comcast when I started doing that. But it's basically speaking, your cable modem software update is coming from your cable company almost always. So, yeah. In fact, I don't even think it's funny. I'm looking up. Oh yeah, look, you can get drivers for it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not going to get firmware updates because like almost one of the only ones I've seen is like the broadband Etherfast cable modem, which had a cable modem built in. Yeah, it's even DOCSIS 2.0. It's actually getting kind of hard to find a cable modem these days. In any case, if it works, don't fix it, especially your phone system. There's nothing worse than like patching your phone system and finding out you just wiped out your corporation's ability or your home's ability to use VoIP.
Don't do that.
Yeah, see whether or not Rogers is updating and see if they have an updated cable modem. But generally speaking, if you're getting the speeds you expect, up speed and down speed, you're not having bad ping times, it's probably not broken and you probably don't need to fix it. Email twitch@twit.tv if you think I am insane and you have reasons for why everyone should be hacking their cable modem immediately. Yeah. And don't think you're going to hack your cable modem to update your speeds because they've kind of polished that hack off. And by the way, that's theft of services and it can get you in jail.
Time for a couple more emails here. One from Chris about a dual GPU system feeling, quote, off. Says, love the show and enjoy watching on my media center weekly. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Chris. I have a question about my current setup. I'm running a Gigabyte P55 UD3R motherboard with dual Sapphire HD 6950 2GB cards. We should talk with our previous emailer. Running Crossfire and pushing 23 by 1080p. First of all, that's a kick-ass gaming rig. Good job. Benchmarks seem to show good improvements with the second card. 3D Mark 11 scores jumped about 61%. 3D Mark Vantage scores jumped about 29%. The problem is, in games that I can actually run across all three screens on Infinity, something just feels off. Sometimes it feels sluggish. Do you think this is more a problem with games not supporting Infinity resolutions well, AMD drivers not being the best, or possibly because the second PCIe drops down to by 4 when 2 cards are in? Any thoughts on whether I should be looking for a new motherboard, or is it something I just need to deal with? Chris, we never feel like this is something you should just have to deal with. Doesn't always mean we have the right answer, but it doesn't mean you should always just sit there and deal with something if you don't think it's working correctly. There's a few things that ran through my mind when I read this question. The motherboard that he's using is a P55 UD3R. That's an older platform. If it's actually running at by 4 speeds, that could potentially be an issue, because what has to happen for Crossfire to work at a 5760 by 1080p resolution is you essentially have to move, let me see, I'm going to do my calculator math here, a 6.2 megapixel image across your PCI Express bus 60 times a second. If you want to maintain a 30 times a second, you want to maintain 60 frames a second. So you're talking about a lot of bandwidth, and any kind of hiccups in that or latency is going to introduce some potential issues when you're talking about a Crossfire configuration with big resolutions like that. So it is possible that if your second PCI Express slot is dropping to by 4, the other possibility is, if I look up this motherboard exactly, it may only have one, maybe that secondary PCI Express slot is actually coming through the chipset as opposed to the processor. If that's the case, then you're adding in more latency and potential issue with bandwidth as well. It could be running a PCI Express 1.0 bandwidth, not PCI Express 2.0 bandwidth. So if I look, this is a deactivated item at Newegg. Yeah, it looks like it only has one PCI Express 2.0 slot and one PCI Express by 16 at by 4 bandwidth. So I'm going to guess that is one of your issues. It's also a potential issue that you're just seeing micro stuttering, that you are very capable of seeing, I guess, or that you seem to be very attentive to. Right. But the P55 platform, I mean, look, if you're running 2 6950 2GB cards and 3 1080p LCDs, I would go with a move to a Z68 motherboard that's going to have support for 2x8 slots that you can put those 6950 cards in, give you a little bit of headroom, you'll be able to support Ivy Bridge processors down the road as well. So whatever CPU you actually have now, you'll be able to upgrade a little bit easier with those platforms too. So that's what I would do to see if this actually fixes your issue, Chris. So don't sit and deal with it just because you think, I don't know if it what the optimal would be. That's never the answer. You've invested a lot of money in your system. Yeah. You might have to invest a little more to get it tweaked exactly how you want.
Yeah, money's the easy part. Sometimes time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'll tell you what: if you get it the way you want it, you will be so. Because if you let it just continue to annoy you, then every time you play a video game, just be like,
yep,
and that just sucks. Should we finish off with 3D audio extensions?
Sure.
A long time ago, Hergé purchased the Creative SB X5 Fatality card, and while expensive, it was worth its money in gold when it came to gaming. In particular, he found the 3DC MSS feature to be super. It was like night and day in games such as Source, Battlefield 2, etc. The 3DC MSS feature might sound like a gimmick, but it really worked great with a pair of quality headphones. Uh-oh, I think I know what this is. I've been browsing the web like a crazy person for any meaningful info on mainly 2 important things. 1, there's a lot of talk on different forums that hardware sound acceleration for games is dead. What's the real deal about this? EAX, OpenAL, and all that. Could you please enlighten me, because I really don't know what to make of it in relation to the future of games? Should I just remove my pre-order on a discrete sound card? Also, I've been looking everywhere but can't find any info on what Battlefield 3 can or cannot utilize in regards to sound technology. Where should we begin with this? 3DC MSS is I want to say the 3D Creative Multi-Speaker Surround. Is it simulation? I'm going to look this up really quickly.
Yeah, it is. So it basically is a synthetic software-based solution that takes stereo audio and attempts to turn it into surround audio.
Right, which is like Dolby headphone and various brands of headphones that are powered, that have individual discrete elements that are powered off of a multi-port audio card. I think it's great that Harrier found that it was a night and day difference. Most people find that it sounds different from stereo and more spread out than stereo, but is a poor substitute for actual, real, discrete, 5-channel surround. Most of us can't actually game with 5 speakers around us, but your mileage may vary as to what you think of the quality of the 3D sound simulation. There's hardware sound acceleration and there's discrete audio hardware. There's a lot of reason to go for discrete audio hardware, whether it's inside the machine on an audio board or outside the machine in an external device, like this critter right here. And the main reason for that, for me, is getting better audio quality and less noise in my audio. Hardware sound acceleration, I tend to think about as the ability to turn on like weird effects. So, the audio is modified by an algorithm that's supposed to make it sound like you're in Radio City Music Hall, or, some giant amphitheater, the ostock.com, or no, o.com, which is the horrible, or os.com. I'm trying to think of what they changed the Oakland A's stadium to, some horrible name. What's the last time you even bought a sound card, Ryan, for a machine?
Well, it's honestly been a long time. His question, I had to go back and look. I remember some stuff about where he talks about the EAX extensions and that kind of stuff. What happened was when Windows Vista was released, the sound stack was modified dramatically, and essentially they killed the ability. It was on really good Wikipedia entry. They basically changed the way so that hardware and the direct audio couldn't directly communicate anymore. They didn't have a direct connection between these. And so OpenAL, you remember something called, what was it called? They released Creative Alchemy, which attempted to intercept commands for technologies like EAX, translated into OpenAL, which could be used still with Vista and Windows 7. Essentially, when Windows Vista came out, it kind of destroyed the whole aftermarket hardware accelerated audio solutions. And that's why most audio solutions, games and those types of stuff, don't have any support for that type of technology, because it was such a hack to get around and try to get it to be used again. Interestingly, according to this Wikipedia entry about direct sound, Windows 8 will see the return of hardware accelerated audio using the WAS API. So with the new stack, you'll see a resurgence of hardware offloading of sound and that kind of stuff that went away with Vista in Windows 7.
Right. And then when you look at the specs for Battlefield 3, it's basically like DirectX compatible sound card. If you're gaming in a home theater environment, you take the digital output from your motherboard or your audio card, you send it into your surround sound receiver. If you have surround sound speakers on your gaming machine. But yeah, I didn't realize they effectively killed off direct sound and replaced it. Yeah, I did not know that. Poor creative.
Poor creative. Yeah, exactly. They're the sound card gods, and all of a sudden there wasn't much they could do better than everybody else. So
they make some nice cards.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for this week in computer hardware, aka Twitch. We might be talking about 4 terabyte hard drives next week and where they are. And
2 weeks.
Finicky, 2 weeks. That's right. We're going to be taking, Ryan reminds me, we're going to be taking Thanksgiving week off so Chad can go home and see his family. Way to go, Chad. Way to ruin the fun for everybody. You and the family relations.
I would ruin my family relations if I was here on Thanksgiving as well. So
Yeah, actually, I think we all would. So Chad, it's okay, man. I'm torturing you because I'm a jerk, not because you've actually done anything wrong. Chad, of course, being the man producing. Look at Chad, vindicated.
There he is. Yeah.
So sweet, so innocent, even for a Texan. Did you, Chad? They never get to see you on the podcast. Show yourself again.
Might be one of the first times on Twitch. You saw him. There he is.
Hello.
There he is.
He does a great job running the board for us, and he does a good job picking out the pictures that I happen to be wanting to talk about at that time too. It's an art, not a science, gentlemen. It takes somebody who knows how to do doing it.
It is non-trivial. Did you grow up in Texas?
I did. I was born and raised in Austin. So, yeah.
You are an Austin native?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you believe in keeping Austin weird?
Absolutely. All the time.
And are you a fan of the Salt Lick or the county?
Absolutely. Yeah, barbecue, the best barbecue around. Actually, Brian used to live a few miles, like 1 mile from the Salt Lick, which is like a block in Texas numbers. But
yes.
So I'd go to Salt Lick all the time.
Nice.
Salt Lick is really good. And your favorite video game currently, sir?
My favorite video game would have to be Skyrim. Just bought it. I've been playing the freak out of it. It's really good.
Which is why you're probably installing one of Ryan's beloved catheter systems for your extended Skyrim set. I know people who have played Skyrim for 6 hours and not even realized it. Some of the people I work with are completely losing their minds on Skyrim.
Maybe one day I'll be able to do that.
All you got to do is get a divorce, man. Or just commit yourself to being non-existent.
Lots of free time then.
And that's it for Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 146. I'm Patrick. Actually, you know what? What's coming up on PC Per this week?
What do we have coming up on PC Per? So we're looking at a couple of new Antec cases this week, P280 and the Antec 1100, both kind of like $130, $140 cases that have a lot of really great features. Antec's cases have needed some updating, and they finally get some of this. We're also going to be looking at an interesting system that's going to have a big Black Friday sale from CyberPower. It's going to be like a bulldozer-based system for like $400, $399 or something like that. So we'll be curious to see what kind of performance we get out of that. For a kind of a custom-built $400 machine. Yeah. And do you guys have some new stuff coming up on Techzilla for the holiday week?
Twice every week at Techzilla.com we come up with new stuff. Actually, I'm going to show people how to use a VPN system to pretend they're browsing from anywhere in the world, which nearly made my boss weep because he is a Brit, and he will now be able to get the British version of the BBC websites. We got an Ultrabook Roundup with Jason Cross from PC World. Our hands-on, we've already judged the Kindle Fire. Now we're actually going to show the Kindle Fire in action. And then we've got our Blu-ray picks in home theater, I should say our HDTV picks for Black Friday, and Lori Grunin's going to come on and do some digital camera recommendations. And you know what? There's more coming up, but I'm going to shut up, and we'll talk about the rest of it after Thanksgiving. Because I have tried at least 3 times to end this podcast and refused, because there's always more to say. This time I will say it. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
That's it for This Week in Computer Hardware. We'll see you next time.